Thank you, everybody, for attending today's webinar, Developing an Entrepreneurial Mindset for Project Managers, Gaining the Edge. My name is Kevin Aguano. I'll be your host for today. Today, presenting, we have Bill Richardson. Bill Richardson is one of our senior facilitators at Procept. He's been with us for many years. Bill is a project manager, highly credentialed project and program manager with 30 plus years of experience. He also teaches critical thinking, strategic thinking, communications, and some of our other leadership courses as well. Bill's a coach, an agile project manager, and has lots of credentials and is a fascinating speaker who fills his presentations with lots of interesting stories. So I'm really excited to hear what he has to say today. Bill has presented recently on another webinar in this series on the mega trends report from PMI and what the sort of distilling some of that and looking at the future of project management. This is one of a regular series of webinars that we're running throughout the year, roughly every 2 weeks, sometimes even a little bit more frequently than that throughout the year. We'll be running these free webinars. They're all being recorded, and those recordings will be posted to YouTube later for those who are listening to this not live. You're listening to from the YouTube recording. Thank you for listening in. For those here live, you're able to ask questions of the speaker. What I'm going to encourage you to do is type the questions into the chat window or the questions tab within the web interface. So the chat window or the questions tab, you can type your questions in there. We will be formally addressing questions at the end. So we're going to let Bill go through his presentation, and then there will be time for Q&A at the end. Without further ado, Bill, take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin, and hello, everybody. I'm a little bit taken aback sometimes with Kevin because he describes me as a senior member of the Procepts team, and I'm sure he means that I've spent a lot of years doing this, not necessarily that I'm old, but that's another story. I am delighted to have a chance to do this because I describe myself to my clients as a learning leader. So every time I'm coaching, every time I'm consulting, every time I'm teaching a class on something, I'm really not training. I'm leading learning in a process of learning, which today is no exception. This topic is near and dear to my heart because I use this same concept in teaching advanced program management to groups in Europe. Because the entrepreneurial mindset is a really big advantage for people, not from only a project management point of view, but from a personal brand point of view. And I'm going to explain together today as we talk about this why that is. The edge is important, and the edge is like a double-edged sword, so to speak. Having an edge means that you have some advantage. You have to get things done. The other part of the double-edged sword is sometimes to get things done, you need to be afraid. You need not to be afraid to use the edge of the sword. In other words, push the environment a bit, or be willing to cut through resistance in the process. So it's a double-edged sword, literally, here that I want to talk to you about for this topic. My background is banking. I spent 35 years in the banking business. I took early retirement after 35 years to do what I really love to do, which is what I'm doing right now, which is facilitating learning and growth. Kevin, can you still see my toolbar?
No, all is good. Thank you.
Okay. So what's important here is, as I spent the last 15 years working in either consulting or training, etc., in various parts of the world, it's given me some really good perspective on what works and what doesn't work. And one of the things that I've really zoned in on is the soft skills. And if you were attending one of the sessions I did earlier on Megatrends 2021 that's published by PMI, one of the things that they specify or illustrate for everybody is that ways of working are changing, that the soft skills have now become the power skills in how things work. And the third thing that the megatrends discussion that we had was about what's called business acumen. Now, the reason that's significant is that the whole idea of the entrepreneurial mindset is really closely aligned to having a higher developed level of business acumen. For me, it's probably natural because I was a commercial lender in the bank and had many different senior roles of leadership. And I started out as a teller and worked my way up. But business acumen is important. And I'm going to tie the business acumen in today to the whole idea of a mindset towards an entrepreneurial approach and how this plays. One other thing that I think that I've learned is that the power of the soft skill element brings a major differentiator in the process. And I'm going to be talking to you about risk. I'm going to be talking to you about a guy named Branson, which unless you've been under a rock, you've been watching him go into space in a separate and distinct way of being launched into space, other than NASA or however the Chinese or the Russians do it. And my favorite quote on this topic is the one you see on the screen, which is, "You've got to take risks if you're going to succeed." And he goes on to say, "I would much rather ask for forgiveness than permission." Now, what's so beautiful about this quote is that it is an embodiment of the entrepreneurial mindset. The entrepreneurial mindset is about not being afraid to get scored on, using a sports analogy. If you try to play the game safe and you're going to win 1-0 perhaps, yeah, you might win. But the idea in entrepreneurial mindset territory is that you're willing to win the game 6-5. You're willing to get scored on. You're willing to take risks, much like Mr. Branson is in terms of how he catapulted himself up into space with a rocket approach that was dramatically different than the way we've done it in the past in the process. And you'll recognize this whole picture. It's one of the many pictures that you'll see everywhere about him going into space and everything that goes with that. What I find significant about this is one of his quotes that was made prior to him going into space was about being, in the end, the solutions to big problems won't come down to school reports or PhDs, etc. But you got to get out there. You've got to ask questions. You don't need all the answers. You need a good way of getting questions put on the table. But the thing that he said that is significant for today is seeing things differently. The entrepreneurial mindset is clearly a see things differently kind of approach from traditional project management. And you work towards to find the answer. The answer is out there. And often the answer lies in the minds of the people doing the work. And there lies the opportunity to do something about this by talking to the people who are actually doing the work in the process. I'm just going to check. Yeah, this sequence is going well. Since I sort of look at myself as a learning leader, I want to talk to you about a learning roadmap, if you will, for today. And we're going to start off with talking about VUCA. VUCA is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It is a way of explaining the pace of the world, how fast things move, how complex things are, how many moving parts there are even to get to get connected to the internet sometime in the process. And I want to tie in how the PM role is an antidote to all the elements of VUCA. And the question I'm going to be asking you is, are you going to be paralyzed by VUCA? Are you going to be energized by VUCA? Well, I can tell you, Branson, he is energized by VUCA. And I hope, or I'm intending for all of you to also be energized by VUCA and not to be paralyzed by it. The second stop on this whole journey here is bringing to light or to clarity 10 entrepreneurial mindsets, if you will, about the entrepreneurial PM. And I'm going to use the acronym EPM, which stands for Entrepreneurial Project Management, or Project Manager. So I want to help you understand those and how you can bring those to life. The next stop is to talk about a framework that I've developed to help everybody understand the whole thing about entrepreneurial leadership and the mindsets, and it's a TLC strategy. How you think, how you lead, and how you communicate. And I've taken the 10 and I've put them together in 3 groups. I want to talk about next the power of the edge, and the reason that it is so critical for you to sort of quote move mountains, deal with VUCA, set yourself apart from everybody else, your brand, and how that can be virtually that double-edged sword, be valuable. Next stop would be, let's look at the new way of showing up. Let's talk about those mindsets and how you can begin to make changes to develop them further. And I'm going to recommend the application of a SWOT: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we'll talk about that, near the end. And then at the end of this, we'll sort of bring it together. And the pledge I'm hoping from each of you is that you'll teach what you've learned today to anybody that'll listen. Because I believe in the teach to learn kind of strategy for anything in whether it's stuff you learned in school or stuff that you learned as being a parent or a leader in an organization. Let's start with VUCA. It is pervasive. It is fast moving. It is a way of understanding the world as it exists today. And its acceleration, its velocity is why you exist as a project manager if you are one. Volatility is about the environment demanding that you make changes quickly, some of which are not in your control. And the irony of all this is you as a PM, by virtue of the fact that you're willing to put up a vision of your project finished or your program finished, that helps give clarity to people that where we're going is I understand it, I get it. The fact that we're a little bit behind schedule right now is not so significant because I understand where we're going. But like it's said in the Bible, without a vision, you shall perish. And in a project, it's the same way. So with a good vision, we don't care if we're running late today because we know that we're going to make it up, and we know that we're going to a good right place, and we're all in. The uncertainty of VUCA is enormous. You know that because of obviously COVID perhaps, and we have to take action these days on things, and we don't have all the details. We don't have all the information. Well, from a project management point of view, you are uniquely positioned to tame or to have an antidote to uncertainty, and it's called risk management. When I work with clients, 2 things that you need to do well as a PM. You need to be good at estimating because there are no late projects, just bad estimates. And you need to be adept at addressing risk in the process. So if you look at those 2 things and, in the organization, you tame that whole impact of uncertainty, you can start to begin to see the value proposition for good project management. Add in the entrepreneurial spirit, if you will, or approach. That means you're willing to take ownership. You're not afraid to get scored on, but you're willing to do this as a team. Makes a dramatic difference. Complexity is probably straightforward. Lots of things going on, lots of moving parts. And guess what? Project managers are really well positioned to tame that complexity by a thing called work breakdown structure. Beginning to break it down into a view that everybody can see the pieces, do the estimating, etc. in the process. And lastly, things are ambiguous. The environment is asking you to do things that you don't have the expertise for, perhaps. Well, the fact that there's a structure in project management, we have templates, we have approaches that are repeatable, we can help tame that ambiguity. So I think you all should be more comfortable and confident that you can be energized by VUCA and not paralyzed by it in the process. And today I'm giving you another way of, of doing that. To put this in a personal perspective, I want you to think about your brand as a key part of this. Your brand is about your unique value of delivery of value to the organization, to the environment. It's what you do. It comes from what you're known for, what you stand for, what you're capable of becoming. And when I'm finished in this webinar, my intention is for you to feel much more comfortable that you can take on an entrepreneurial approach to project management, and that's going to strengthen your brand. And you want to be known as somebody who's entrepreneurial, that you want to stand for doing the right thing at the right time and taking ownership. And lastly, that you're capable of becoming a better PM, a better leader, a better integrator of change, if you will, in the environment. The watchword here is you grow your brand, you protect your brand, you promote your brand. You grow your brand by attending webinars like this. You protect your brand by showing up on time and living up to expectations. And of course, you promote your brand by being able to share with the world what your capabilities are and how you can add value in the process. The work I do with my clients, the number one weakness is generally promotion of brand, their brand. Mainly because we were taught as kids, especially those of us who are over the age of 50, that we're, to be seen, not heard, and don't brag, etc. And if this was a branding class, we would talk about how to change that. So to keep this sort of straightforward and pictorial, think of these 10 core skills or mindsets assembled in a grouping of 3 each. And what I've done is taken the 10: emotional intelligence, ownership and commitment, servant leadership, stakeholder partnership, network performance, business acumen, customer centricity, judgment, risk management, and learning agility. And I'm sure you've been exposed to probably all of these at some juncture in your career. But to make this manageable and to make it understandable, I've applied a framework. And that framework is about how you think, how you lead, and how you connect. So business acumen, judgment, and risk management apply to how you think. Ownership and commitment, servant leadership, and stakeholder partnership apply to how you lead. Customer centricity, network performance, and emotional intelligence apply to how you connect with people. And I'm going to go through each one of these in more depth here. However, one I haven't mentioned yet, that it's the center of the universe for all of this, is learning agility. Just as I call myself a learning leader, your success as a professional is really much dependent on how effectively you lead, or effectively you learn. And are you nimble in the way you learn? And do you learn only what you need? And are you comfortable with just-in-time learning, in the process? Let me expand on that by giving you some learning agility characteristics. The items in red sort of amplify or illustrate what is the mindset of an entrepreneur, but also keywords in terms of 5 areas. So think of it as there's a mental part, and that mental part means, are you open to new ideas? Are you willing and able to look at problems with a beginner's mind? Or are you steeped and trapped in implicit and explicit biases of what you took in grade school, what you took in university, and your PhD? The second column is about people. It's about the whole aspect of, can you empathize with people? Do you have that quality of empathy? Third column is about change. Are you curious? Are you willing to look at things in a different way? Are you wondering how this could be done better? The fourth column over is about results. Can you be creative? Can you look at things in a non-conventional way again, or are you stuck in the good old, or the tried and true old project management way of working? And which I'm suggesting to you, all of you, needs to have a shakeup, needs to change. And lastly, self-awareness. How do you know yourself well in the process? When I work with executives, I work on three things. I work on, first of all, their sense of self-confidence. Do they have self-confidence in that process? The second thing is around this quality here of self-awareness. Are they aware of this, of where their gaps are, where their strengths are in the process? Because that self-confidence and that self-awareness is key. But the real differentiator for senior level excellence is self-discipline. Because you can have all the self-awareness in the world and you can have all the other aspects, but if you don't have self-discipline, even almost to the point of that stoic approach where you focus on what you control and you take the rest as it happens, is sort of that idea. And that self-discipline to do that, is very important. I'm not going to go through all the elements in each of these. So I'm going to pick out one of each. From the openness, the mental part, asking questions, and particularly questioning conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom, and wisdom is important. You would have noticed in my intro page, one of the things I'm focused on right now is helping people over the age of 50 make and have their last third of their life to be the best third. One of the reasons, and one of the things you need to be able to do is to begin questioning what you've learned, what the context was, and is it still applicable in the process? And of course, reading broadly. I do a lot of work in organizations around the world, and the gap that I always see is that people do not read enough. They don't. They believe they already understand things enough. And I talk about a bias, a neuroscience bias called the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect basically says incompetent people don't know they're incompetent, or everybody overestimates their abilities. If I asked 100 people on the 401, are you a good driver, an excellent driver? Almost all of them would say yes. And statistically, that's not possible. Under the people part, it's helping other people. Diversity and the differences of opinion is the heart of entrepreneurship, is being willing to face down and listen to those other points of view. Curiosity, change. The big part about this is that there's a difference between change assimilation and change implementation. You can implement a new change by putting in new processes, etc. But change assimilation is the goal. It means that the new capability that we've put in play has become the new normal, and it's actually being applied, and it's actually delivering value. Results, obviously, flexible, adaptable, a big part of this. And lastly, self-awareness. Being aware of your weaknesses, being willing to take action on feedback that you get, candid feedback from people, is the entrepreneurial way in the process. And you learn your way into the success arena. You don't necessarily work your way into the learning arena or success arena in the process. So let's talk about the thinking piece. I'm just keeping a watch on my time. Time on my watch. This thinking piece, business acumen, a big part of the differentiator here. Your ability to understand its linkage, the connection, the project, and the reason for the project in terms of business terms. Do you understand the context? Do you understand that we're here to make money, save money, or keep the executives out of jail? Judgment, big gap. Work I do with leaders is clearly the gap is people having sound judgment. They can weigh a appropriately the risks and make good decisions, and they do that in a patient, methodical, objective way, especially when they're under stress in the process. Because when we put you under stress, judgment becomes somewhat suspect, because we're willing to let go of any of those kind of things, and we make snap decisions, snap judgments, if you will, in the process. Risk management, I'm sure you all, if you're in any part of the project management world, understand its importance. In project management and risk management go hand in hand. Again, a good entrepreneurial mindset is willing to take those risks, but is very capable of understanding how to manage and mitigate those risks. And if you look at Branson, getting into this airplane, brought up to space, or technical space, in the mothership in a new way, and there's been all sorts of discussion about the failure of the previous sort of trials. Musk has the same sort of strategy, or the same thing he's got to keep in the back of his mind. So those three are a big part of this thinking part. It's how you think. It's that cognitive piece. And of course, learning agility we've talked about. And it's the same. Every one of these is energized by learning agility. Working with ambiguity or ambiguous terrains and adapt to the changes thereto in that domain. Focus on what you control and take the rest as it happens, which is really a stoic approach to thinking and to life, actually. The second one after thinking is connecting. It's about emotional intelligence. It's about the ability to cope with pressures where the stress is there, the complexity and ambiguity is there, and you still need to work in that empathy piece in the process. And the big part of this is, anybody can lead effectively when the sun is shining, the wind is at your back, etc. But the real challenge is being able to succeed when there's a headwind, and when things aren't going well, and your emotions are all over the map in the process. Part of a good entrepreneurial approach is you're not afraid to get scored on, and if you get scored on, it's not going to be the end of the world, and you bounce right back. And that's that emotional intelligence piece in spades. Network performance is not about the quality of the signal coming to your phone. It's about your network, the alliances you build, because one of the big strategies that you all should be thinking about right now for your personal brand is the establishment and the building of alliances with different parts of your organization. What most people forget is it's not going to work if you want to have an alliance with somebody, and today you go and talk to the person knowing full well next week you're going to ask them for something. I mean, that's not going to fly. Alliances are investments. Networks are investments, and they will carry the day, especially if you adopt this mindset of being an entrepreneur, because somewhere, someplace, your network and your alliances that you've built is going to save your bottom. It's going to be that one little thing that made a difference, in the process. The third thing is customer centricity. Now, I come from a banking world, and customer is king. So to me, it's not a big deal. However, the people I work with, and I work with companies like Philips, Citigroup, companies in Finland. This customer centricity sometimes is either too developed or underdeveloped. But the sense is that you need to figure out what the customer is requiring, what they value and need, which will be a big part of this in the process. And if you pay attention to that, you can keep that customer centricity without sacrificing either your soul or the value to your company, the people that you're doing the work for in the process. So your connecting skills as an entrepreneur are significant. These are only three. I recommend you go deeper in those in the process. And again, it's energized, and the center of the universe for the connecting piece is also learning agility. Being what I call interpersonal savvy. Having savvy about how to talk to anybody about anything is such a critical issue. And it really applies to this topic today: network, centricity of customer, emotional intelligence, in the process. The last one is the leading part, which is more conventional, but it revolves around three elements: ownership, servant leadership, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about, especially if you're in agile world, and then of course the partnership of the piece. So ownership and commitment is critical, because here's something to remember: shared ownership is the prerequisite for accountability. You will never get anybody to be accountable for anything in your team unless they share the ownership for what you're doing with you. So one of the secret things about being an entrepreneurial and having entrepreneurial kind of approaches is that you work towards tying shared ownership with shared accountability, and you're willing to personally work within the discretionary parts of program and project management, and how that might be applied to reach a success point. And that there's a difference between commitment and compliance. Compliance is doing what you're told. Commitment is being willing to apply my brain to create new ideas. I call it creating new dots. Anybody can connect the old dots. What entrepreneurship is about is creating new dots for other people to connect to in the process. In fact, that's a very easy way of differentiating the entrepreneurial mind, is they're always creating new dots for people to connect to. Servant leadership is highly talked about. It's highly applied, especially in agile. It's motivating team members, of course. It's doing it from behind the scenes. In my mind, 50 years I've been in the business world, a lot of us, especially over the age of 50, were socialized that the whole idea here is you lead as a limelight leader. Limelight being, I'm in the front, Alexander the Great, I'm charging Darius and his army. That's sort of the conventional wisdom that we all grew up with. Well, we're seeing now, because of COVID, because of the great generational shift away from what used to be the baby boomer domain, is now the domain of the remnants of Gen X, and the next domain holder is going to be the millennials, who make up the most of the generational groups, right, in the process. So this servant leadership now becomes more important, and the opposite of limelight leadership is leading from behind the scenes. It's helping others be successful. It's removing the obstacles, the ambiguity, and the distractions so that people can be successful, and mobilizing around purpose and how that goes. Very critical part, ironically, for the entrepreneur. Lastly, stakeholder leadership or stakeholder partnership. Partnership is a key word here. It's influencing stakeholders. It's about the willingness to manage the competing interests in the world of politics and in the world of business. No matter how you look at it, the stakeholders in your project or your program or even your department, it's delusional to think that they're going to have the same value and needs as you have. So the competing interests will always be there. So the entrepreneurial spirit is to take what's called equanimity, which means to accept what is. You accept that there are differences of opinion. There will be differences of motivations, and you work with that, and you don't take issue with it, and you don't take umbrage because of it, and you work with it from a learning agility point of view in the process. So let's stand back for a minute. We've got the idea of these thinking, leading, connecting kind of things that we can do to become a powerful leader slash EPM, entrepreneurial project manager. So how do you get everybody to play in the game? How do you begin to help everybody understand this and begin to support you? Well, I would recommend you read a book called The Oz Principle by Connor Smith and Hickman. I'm going to give you the summary of it right here, but it gives you the ability as an entrepreneur to establish the working model for what you expect for everybody in your team. And what that means is that you expect people to be above the line. What that means is above the line means when you see a problem, you own that problem, you solve that problem, you do it. In other words, remember when I talked about Branson talking about permission versus the invitation? So what this says is you communicate to your teams that you expect people when they see a problem or see an opportunity to see it, own it, solve it, do it. That's called above the line, and that's your model of accountability that you want everybody to follow. Now, that's fine, but the reality of human nature being what it is, and if I were you, I'd become a student of human nature because it's messy, it's inconsistent, and below the line is what Connor, Smith, and Hickman talked about in terms of the blame game. So while above the line, you're the victor. You know, you get it done, you charge in, you might get scored on occasionally, but you win. Victimization means that people below the line, so to speak, are either going to wait and see, what are they going to tell me what to do? I'm not going to do something because I'm going to see if this is even going to work. They might try to cover their tail because they don't want to get themselves in trouble. They're not willing to take the risk. They point fingers, oh, this didn't work because of IT didn't do their job properly. Or it could be it's just not my job. I don't think it's my job. Or ultimately they're stressed or under pressure and they're confused and they just default to tell me what to do. So now this model, and I use this model everywhere with leaders and teams, to help them articulate to their team what do they expect in terms of a accountability model. That accountability model is see it, own it, solve it, do it. It's an entrepreneurial kind of model. And help people self-disclose or self-identify when they're below the line. And that gives you a way of helping people intellectually understand what you mean by above the line thinking in the process. If you want accountability that's coming from above the line. You do not want accountability that's coming from below the line because it was given to you or it was offered or handed over reluctantly in a compliance environment and not in a committed environment in the process. So a very important concept that you can implement is actionable, implementable. Highly recommend you start doing it, even if you don't believe anything I've said about the mindset. Start with a SWOT. The easiest way to get entrepreneurship going, an entrepreneurial spirit, mind, etc., is to do an internal personal SWOT. Internally, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Bounce that off people, begin to use some of the information I've given you, begin to start getting feedback from your boss. Also, start looking at what are the threats in the environment to you getting where you need to go. What are your competitors doing? What's the industry doing? Where's the industry going? Where's PMI going? Download their document, Megatrends 2021. Highly recommend you do it. And what opportunities are out there? Like COVID is opportunity rich, for example, because of all the changes it's made in the way people work, the way people think, etc. And begin to look at other opportunities. And again, I would bounce this off your boss or a coach, etc., to begin to establish sort of a way to approach this. So coming back here, I can't emphasize enough, do not be afraid to get scored on as your brand, one of your brand attributes. You want to be known as somebody who is not afraid to get scored on in the process. And if you think about this whole thing this way, that learning is going to energize your ability to master this. So the energizer for learning, or the accelerator for learning, for mastery is learning. The accelerator for what I call chemistry. Chemistry is connecting with people. You cannot be a good entrepreneur if you don't connect with people. To connect, you need to be able to establish chemistry. Guess what? The accelerator of that is simply empathy in the process. The third part of being an entrepreneur is actually to deliver. There's no sense having all these great plans unless you actually put the puck in the net, as they say. Now, guess what? The accelerator of delivery is listening to what is the need. And a good entrepreneurial mind is constantly listening, a beginner's mind, and listening for what the need is, not what they think is the solution in the process. Branson says, as I'll close this off, is he says, the dreams don't scare you, they're too small. And can you imagine if you start reading about the guy and you start looking at some of the stuff he's done, he walks the talk. Now, does he have his distractors? Is his hair longer than what I would have it? Yeah. But you gotta admire his exemplification of this whole idea of living life to the fullest in the process. Does he have a lot of money? Yes, but he still lives life to the fullest in the process. So we walked through this. We walked through VUCA. It's don't let it paralyze you. 10 mindsets. Those 10 mindsets that will help you become a bona fide and legitimate and powerful EPM can be easily worked into this. Think of it as TLC. Thinking, leading, and connecting is a way of beginning to understand this. And the energy source for all of this is learning agility. Because if you think about it, learning is the essence of mastery, and that's how you're going to make it in the process. The double-edged sword piece we talked about right at the beginning, it is sometimes you need to have an edge. You need to push the envelope and the boundaries. And the other one, it gives you a career edge to be known as somebody who's not afraid to get scored on, has an entrepreneurial spirit or attitude, and you understand and take ownership, and you're focused a lot on innovation. New way of showing up. I think you've got that in the process. Before I go further on this, I want to add one more piece to this, that I think a big part of what makes a good entrepreneur, entrepreneurial PM, is constantly be innovating. Innovation is key. And as a PM, you constantly innovate how work gets done, how work breakdown structures are assembled and facilitated, finding ways of doing things faster, quicker, smarter all the time. Innovation is the energy force that you bring. It's your secret sauce of success. It's I would even call it your superpower, is the willingness to innovate in the process. Lastly, despite all this, you gotta talk to people. You gotta connect. You gotta have chemistry. And this is a simple thing that I always recommend. Before you speak, think. Is it true what I'm about to say? Because it might not be because of context or whatever. Is it helpful? Are you actually adding value to something, or are you just saying this because you want to throw 2 cents in to show that you are either listening or whatever? Are you inspiring people, really? Because motivation is lighting a fire under somebody. Inspiration is lighting a fire in somebody. When people have it lighted inside them, like that's what an entrepreneur does, they will run with it, they will be committed, and they may make mistakes, but they're going to be with you. The end is about, is it necessary? Is it really necessary to say what I'm about to say? Is it unnecessary triviality I'm giving feedback on? My recommendation is buy yourself some tranquility by forgetting about the trifles. Don't bother to comment on the fact that they spelt the word Mississippi wrong, for example. And lastly, my parting comment here is kindness. Is it kind? To be a good entrepreneur and to really make that work, you're going to push the envelope everywhere. But you need to do it and can do it in a kind way, that you respect kindness and that you treat people in a kindly manner in the process. Anybody have any questions?
Okay, thank you very much, Bill. Okay, anybody who wants to ask questions, now's your chance. You can enter them in the chat window or in the questions window. We do have some questions that were entered along the way. The first one is from Karen. She says, isn't there an element of manipulation being an entrepreneur, either of the system or of others?
So Karen, you might use the word manipulation. I would use the word leverage. I think the dramatic difference between the two is they're easily confused and they're easily mistaken for each other. But I think an entrepreneur will leverage what's out there in the environment. And if you look at Branson, he leverages technology. He leverages certain things that are going on in the environment. And yes, there's doors open because of other people's failings that he's taken advantage of. There's no question. I don't see that as manipulation. I see that as leveraging and taking advantage of something that is for the good of mankind. The only other thing I would add to this, Karen, is I separate manipulation on one end of a continuum from ethical influence. So for me, if I'm ethically influencing a situation, I'm fine. If I'm manipulating, that's different. I'm doing things for my own purposes, and I have a sort of a less than honorable intent. That would truly be would be the difference in the two. Karen, does that make sense?
She typed thanks.
Okay.
There's another question here. Does being scored on mean being challenged by others? Shouldn't one be prepared then to back up your actions and decisions?
Absolutely. But here's the thing. Think of it this way. Think of William Tell. And William Tell, if you remember the saga of William Tell, he had to shoot the apple off of his son's head, or else there was going to be hell to pay, so to speak. So think of it this way. So yeah, he has the bow, he draws the bow properly, he knows exactly how to do it in the process, and he's aiming at his son's head, the apple rather, on his son's head. Now, this is all good. So the best he can do is prepare properly to, have his left arm properly extended. So, but after the arrow leaves his bow, he has no more control over that arrow. So his son could move, there could be a gust of wind, could be anything. So he's done his best by preparing for what that is. So it's the same thing here in the process. You can play a really good game. You can do everything perfect, but still get scored on because of a bad bounce or whatever in the process. So the secret is being willing to accept the fact that no matter how good I am, how smart I am, and how good my team is, there are things that could happen that could cause the outcome not to be ideal. I'm not going to get bent out of shape because I didn't get the outcome, but I have the comfort that I prepared the best I could under the circumstances. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Bill.
Did he say yes or no?
She said excellent, and she has your book Thinking on Purpose with a smiley face.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
Okay. Somebody else made a comment that this webinar fits in nicely with last week's webinar. Last week's webinar from Dr. Sammy Fahmy was called Know Thyself, Success or Self-Awareness as the Key to Emotional Intelligence. So
I could see that there's a subset of this that applies to that. Absolutely, that's a good observation.
Yeah. There's another question here. It says, my experience working in the banks has been that as an entrepreneur, I was not welcomed. I need to toe the line and fit in. Eventually, I left. Could you comment about fighting the old culture and resistance to change?
Yeah, so two parts to this. I don't know how recently you've experienced the banking industry, but I know the banking industry by virtue of the great generational shift. By that, I mean The baby boomers who established that culture you've just described some time ago is either dying off or retiring and then dying off. The Gen Xers and the millennials are much more open to that. And the group that's coming along called Gen Z. Gen Z are in it to win it. And they are much more oriented to the entrepreneurial idea in the process. So I think that's part of this. The other part that is significant, industrial age thinking still pervades. It is still there in the minds of a lot of people. But I do see the clients now are more in the game of the entrepreneurial sort of approach, including the banks. So if I were you, I would revisit that banking thing. And I don't know how recent that was in the process. But I have to say, even though what I said is true, they would not be as open to entrepreneurial ideas and project management as would, say, Philips, which I do a lot of work with. Philips, as a manufacturing company, they have embraced big time this EPM idea, and of course the entrepreneurship that goes with it, because they're only as good as their next light bulb, and that's how someone comes up with the next light bulb, and it's not necessarily always the engineers. Right?
Very good. So there's another question coming up. By the way, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat window or the questions window on the web interface. It's your opportunity to get your questions answered by an expert in the field. Next question says, can you comment on the need for sales skills by project managers? Example, selling your plan to the team, selling approaches to stakeholders, etc.
Right. Two things. One is influence. You have four options. You can tell people what to do. You can sell them on an idea. You can negotiate with them, or you can enlist them. So, for example, telling is obvious. Sales is a very big thing you should be able to do. So when and I'm actually going to be doing an influence course tomorrow for another client, and part of the idea is that the whole idea of influence is one of which is that sales approach, but that's not always applicable, in the world. That whole idea of negotiating, but I want to just for a minute tie into that enlisting strategy that you attract people to this idea by appealing to their desire to be part of something bigger is a really good strategy, that sort of plays in this. In the process. And at the end of the day, from a sales perspective, most people don't really spend any time reading about it. And a good book I would recommend is To Sell is Human by Daniel Pink in the process. And by the way, one of the simple ways that you can sell things is it's a three-letter word called FAB: features, applications, and benefits. The secret to selling executives on something is don't start with the benefits. Start with the features, describe for them how those features can be applied, and then follow up with a benefit that will be a result of that application. Is a much better way of selling ideas and concepts to executives in the process. Most people start with the benefit, and it doesn't work as well. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Bill. There's another question here from Fahim that I think I will answer. Do I get PDUs, professional development units, for this webinar? And the answer is absolutely. You can claim one PDU, one professional development unit, for this webinar. Recently, PMI changed the rules of how PDU codes work, and a lot of our past PDU codes have expired, so we've got to create new ones. But there is a process for self-claiming these PDUs. You have to go in and enter Procept as your learning provider. Our code is 1021, and you'll find us, and then just type the name of the webinar and claim one PDU. In this case, it would go under, I believe, leadership. So you'd claim one PDU under leadership.
So Kevin, can I ask a question of the group?
Sure, go ahead.
Does anybody have any suggestions on what I could have done different or better that would have helped with this subject for you?
Okay, so please type your feedback in the chat window or the questions window. Bill's looking for your feedback. Or if you'd like, you can click your raised hand icon and I will unmute your line and you can give your feedback verbally. One person says, aim the talk to senior PMs.
Okay, good.
That was good feedback. Anybody else?
They don't mean old, right?
I certainly hope not. Provide a PDU code. Okay, fair enough. Another one, talk about PMBOK 7 and the change of mindset.
Is that a direct question right now, or is that a question or something that we should have done in this?
I think that was feedback for you on how to make this presentation better. So for those listening in, PMBOK 7, the Guide to the Project Management Body of Knowledge, our standards document, is dramatically changing. In fact, it's a ground up rewrite, a rethink of how we should be approaching project management. Gone are the 10 knowledge areas, gone are the 5 process groups. Instead, they're changing to a sort of a more philosophical approach on delivery principles and sort of this, thinking about the strategies for approaching a project. And specifically, it's designed to deal with projects in a VUCA world. So it was nice that you brought that up, Bill. PMBOK 7
tailoring is a big deal in PMBOK 7.
Yeah. So PMBOK 7 is now out in for pre-order off Amazon. You can get a digital version, I believe, already. The print version will be out imminently. They're taking orders now. They'll be shipping shortly. Somebody says it will be more need for business acumen. I'm thinking that's related to the concept of the change in mindset, and everything in PMBOK 7 needs more business acumen. I've always said the difference between a junior PM and a senior PM is a junior PM focuses on the PM technical skills. And you think of the PMI talent triangle, they focus on the technical skills, scheduling, risk management, resource management, et cetera. The senior PMs focus on the other 2 areas of the talent triangle, which is all the leadership, the soft skills, but also the business and strategy side, dealing with the, understanding the business and the business case and things like that. That's where the real senior PMs tend to focus. Things like change management, organizational change management, benefits realization, that kind of stuff. Well, Bill, we're at the top of the hour. We are out of time. I want to thank everybody for attending today. This was one again in a series of regular webinars that we run on various topics throughout the year. The next webinar is in 2 weeks, exactly 2 weeks, and it's on the organizational role of a supervisor. How a supervisor is fits into the management of an organization, and how supervisors differ from managers. That will be our presentation in 2 weeks. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Bill. It was a great presentation. I learned a lot. I enjoyed it. You were quite engaging. And bye for now.